Okay, we are live again with our continuing series where we talk to professors, reporters, activists, anybody who can speak intelligently about the concept and the conflict in America on political polarization. With us today, it is a privilege to have John Hibbing, political science professor, University of Nebraska, Department of Political Science. According to John Hibbing, deep individual differences exist across humans. He studies the manner in which these biological variations mitigate the way in which individuals respond to politically relevant environmental occurrences. Working primarily with Kevin B. Smith of the UNL and John Alford of Rice University, Hibbing's current research interests center on the relationship of biological characteristics to political orientations and behavior. These characteristics could be innate, acquired in early development, and or shaped by more proximal experiences, but the fact that at some point they appear to become physiological has important implications for the manner in which political life is conceptualized and studied. His proudest accomplishments include being in the Dana College Athletic Hall of Fame, published an article in Science, a very astounding journal, co-authoring with his son Matthew, collaborating with graduate students, and creating a course for undergraduates entitled Genes, Behavior, and Politics. In his spare time, he likes to travel and read fiction, but mostly he works and plays, especially fish at him at home and with his wife's place in the country. He had a PhD from the University of Iowa, a master's from the University of Iowa, and a bachelor's from Dana College. Some of his appointments were professor to the University of Nebraska, Lincoln from 2001 to present, and also going back to 1985. He's also had an appointment at the Syddansk University, Odense in Denmark, the University of California, Santa Barbara, right on, and Eagleton Institute at Rutgers University, where he's a famous visiting professor, Rice University, and also Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, and political chair of science back at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, also Budapest, Hungary, University of Essex, and Oakland University. He has retired or will be retiring soon after a prolific 40-year career. And he's well known for talking about genes and politics and behavior and the overlap between all those. And again, he's been doing this for a while. There's him on C-SPAN from a while back, an even earlier version of C-SPAN. It shows you how long he's been committed to the subject. But he's also gotten some current articles here. Here's Mother Jones also talking about, can you tell the difference between liberals and conservatives based upon psychological underpinnings of political ideology. And then this, he wrote some additional white papers. This is one of his researchers where they were bringing attention to the research that he was doing there at the University of Nebraska. But these were the books where I found them: Pressured, Liberals, Conservatives, and the Biology of Political Differences. I found that fascinating. While I was talking to the professor, he pointed out that he had an even newer book that was highly relevant called The Securitarian Personality: What Really Motivates Trump's Base and Why It Matters for the Post-Trump Era. We'll get to all that, but first, let's check in and see how well we did. Professor, did I get anything wrong? Did I say something incorrect? Should I correct something, sir?
I think the only correction I would suggest is that the title of that first book was Predisposed, not Pressured. But
oh, whoops. Okay.
Other than that, you were right on.
Okay. I take it. Thank you very much. A lot of your books are getting at the same topic. So before we do a deep dive into the stuff that you've done, as you would explain it to a layperson, what exactly is your fascination with political science, and what angle are you coming at it when you're looking at genes and predisposed behavior and political science? Roughly, what is it that you were trying to prove or research across your various studies that you've produced over the last couple of decades, sir?
Well, I think it all started with just noticing how different people are. You know, I've had many students over the years and other acquaintances, and they just strike me as having such different political beliefs. I was curious to know where they came from. And of course, the standard answer is, well, you know, your parents were different, your socialization was different, but it seemed like there was something that went even beyond that, even deeper than that. So I wanted to find out if that were in fact the case. So, and I think there's a lot of evidence that it is the case. I know just the other day, actually, well, a few weeks ago at the Democratic Convention, we heard Barack Obama say some things about how, deep down we're all the same. And I understand the instinct behind that attitude. We all like to kind of think that we're the same. But I guess what I would like to suggest to your listeners is that maybe that's not true. And maybe we really are very fundamentally different. And I think if that's the case, that might actually make things better in a way, because when we think everybody's the same, then we get really frustrated when they come to different conclusions than we do. They think they must be lazy or uninformed. But if we recognize that maybe they just have totally different values and orientations and psychological predispositions that go right down to their very core, maybe we just say, hey, we've got to treat these people a little bit differently and not get so frustrated when we have these political disagreements.
So it might be a way of bringing more understanding, perhaps calming down the political environment, because people could understand there really is different value sets. But on the other hand, that would mean a sword right through what famous and beloved President Obama was trying to do. We're bringing Americans together. So when he says we're all the same, you're saying, well, maybe not, right? Maybe we can't say that we're all the same and we all have a unified vision of what the future of America should be. Is that a fair summary?
That's exactly a fair summary, yeah. And, at first blush, it seems quite depressing. And it is. It's not like the realization of this, if I convince people it's true, everybody's going to, gather around and sing Kumbaya and we're all going to be great. That's just not in the cards. But I do think, as you indicated, it may lessen frustration a little bit. If we would sit down, maybe you're a strong opponent of Donald Trump, you talk to somebody who's a big supporter of Donald Trump, you're just going to knock your head against a wall. And you think, why aren't they listening to me? I'm making really good points here. But if they have just this fundamental different orientation, biologically, psychologically, genetically, you name it, then I think we have to be a little bit less frustrated that we're not getting through to them.
Is the large dividing line, saying that human beings naturally psychologically divide into two distinct categories seems like that wouldn't happen in nature, but is there a force because we're in the American political system where people are divided into roughly two camps? So are we saying that there's biological and physiological differences roughly between the left and the right, or did you find like 3 or 4 different groups, or are we bifurcated in America? Right or wrong, who knows how, but it is largely everybody falls into a red camp or a blue camp. What did you find as the range of psychological differences among the American population? I'd say across your research over the last 10 to 15 years.
Right. I would caution people against saying there's just two camps, but I do think it flows along a continuum with strong right wingers on one side and strong left wingers on the other. But we have to be careful here, because I think a lot of the issues we attach to the left-right spectrum might not be the fundamental ones. Let me tell you what I mean by that.
Okay.
To me, the basic difference, this is something I get into in that last book that you mentioned, which highlights the difference between Trump supporters and Trump opponents. I do think it really has to do with immigration, in groups, out groups, who's kind of at the core of American society. I think there's some people who really want to protect that core, which we might think of as, white, straight, Christian America. Whereas other people are very eager to broaden that core and to welcome people who don't look like them, who don't think like them. They're willing to try new ideas. I think this has been a fundamental split in all societies from when we were back in, caveman times, in the Neolithic period. I think evolutionarily, we've got these differences that some people welcome people from the tribe over the hill, if you will, and other people are a little bit leery of that. They say, no, you stay away. I think we need to keep doing exactly what we've been doing forever. So to me, this is evolutionarily central. It's always been there. And as we said before, I think if we pretend it's not there, that we're really the same, then we're probably doing a disservice to everyone.
Okay.
So as long as you pause, Marcus, let me jump in a little bit more.
Please.
Maybe this will help. You mentioned I had an appointment in Denmark. I did a lecture tour in association with that, and Danes are very polite. So I remember after one talk, people pulled me aside and they said, look, we didn't want to challenge you on this in the talk in front of everybody, but we do have to let you know this left-right difference. It's you're making a big deal out of it, and it's not central. It's different from country to country. They said, for example, in Denmark, we have lots of right-wing parties that are very supportive of national health care, other aspects of a strong social safety net. They are in favor of abortion rights, things like that. And for once, I thought fairly quickly on my feet. I said, well, listen, I actually know that the right-wing parties in Denmark support a strong social welfare system, but do they support it for recent immigrants? And they said, well, no, of course not. That's where you really get the difference. And I said, okay, well, now you're getting somewhere. This to me is the key. You got the in-group, out-group, who is going to be eligible for these benefits. And so that maybe helps us understand a little bit where I think the centrality of this is. The real, and I think that's worldwide, this difference between supporting in-groups and being welcoming of out-groups. Whether you're talking about Bolsonaro, or Modi in India, or
Right.
Erdogan in Turkey, the rogues gallery. And I think there is
Robes Gallery, yes.
a commonality there. That,
Orban in Hungary.
thank you. Yeah, we
Duterte in Philippines. Yeah.
Maloney in Italy. And
There you go. Hey, yeah. There does seem to be a global issue here of certain societies pushing back. I know that when America was dealing with Donald Trump and his, let's say, appeal to historic America and kind of the tendencies that you're talking about, England was going through Brexit.
Yeah.
And they were telling people about, watch out for those immigrants. And that's how that got passed. Now, not everybody in England bought that, but enough, I think 52% of them did. But if you look at English politicians, they start to the left of American politicians. But if you go to England, there really was a difference between those who were like worried about immigrants coming in and thought they were going to lose their British identity, and the other people who thought they were part of some EU collective. So yeah, there does seem to be a spectrum, Denmark to America, but there always does seem to be these left-right dichotomies in the countries you find where like you said, there is, yes, the Danish conservatives are more liberal than the American Republicans, but they're still conservative, markedly so, from the Danish liberals in the Danish political system.
Yeah, no, Brexit's a great example. I mean, think of what the core slogan for Brexit was: "Take our country back."
Yep.
Who are they taking it back from? You know who they are. And,
Yep.
My co-author Kevin Smith, who you mentioned, he was raised in England, immigrated to the United States, and so he goes back and he talks to a lot of his relatives who are strong supporters of Brexit, and they're working class Brits. And he said, well, don't you think you're going to, have some difficulties financially? Don't you think this will hurt you financially? And they said, yes, it will, but we don't care, because we want to quit listening to the EU and quit being forced to accept all these people into our country. So I just said to me what a powerful force that was, even beyond the economic concerns.
I had talked to some Trump voters, actually a lot of them over the last couple of years, and I'd heard something similar, that even if there's an economic downturn with the change that Trump may have brought as president, at least we'd have our country back, or at least we'd be moving back in the right direction. And so a willingness to take an economic hardship for what appeared to them to be more security or entrenchment in their historical identity.
Exactly. You might remember the book, What's the Matter with Kansas, by the journalist
Yes.
Thomas Frank.
Yep.
So he made the point that, they're voting for people who are going to cut agricultural subsidies. So they're not acting in their own interest. But my response would be, actually, they are acting in their interest. It's just not economic interest. They're voting for people who they think share these kinds of values that you and I are just describing. It's just, so it's their self-interest, but not their economic self-interest.
And they're willing to take the loss. Like you said, they were not just like, oh, you're going to take an economic loss. Fine, but I'm going to preserve my identity.
Yep, that's right.
And that's what's really important to me. And yeah, I was trying to explain to some of my friends how England has conservatives, but they're to the left of ours, but they still have conservatives. They still have these debates. But Yeah, and also when you look at famously California Republicans, right? So Schwarzenegger became a Republican and he pushed climate change. Ronald Reagan became a Republican and he pushed environmental regulation. Nixon became a Republican and he pushed recognizing the Latino population. These aren't things typically Republicans do, but in California, that was kind of a California value, but then they backed wars, which was the traditional conservative thing. So I see the range. So going back to What's the Matter with Kansas, that book came out in 2005. As I understand, it was famous for being a sobering analysis that people really hadn't seen. They kind of thought everybody was gradually going progressive, and then here's this person going back to Kansas and realizing people are voting against their values, I think was the thrust of the book. Why are you voting against your values? Why are you voting? Well, not voting against your values. Why are you voting in a way that seems to hurt you? Yeah. And when you're saying, he goes, well, they found these inherent rural values. That's 2005. We're approaching 2025. 2 decades later. Has the trend started somewhere in the early 2000s and simply continued up to this date? You've been studying this for more than a decade. Would you say this level of bifurcation between the two, as strong as we see it now, how old is this trend? Does this go back to What's the Matter with Kansas? Does it go back before that? Did it start at Kansas, but really not get at a national scale until maybe 2010, 2012 with Tea Party and Obama? You may not have studied that question, but I'm just wondering, what is your observations as somebody who's been a scholar in the field for so long? Has the bifurcation been this bad for the last 20 years? Has it been growing, or is it kind of new and exceptionally rotten and dangerous and something we've only seen the last 5 years?
I think this is the core division that's always existed in societies. Sometimes it's much more salient than others. But I think almost always, whenever there's blood on the streets, it's due to these issues of in-group, out-group, centrality, who's with us, who's against us, what does it mean to be an American? Again, to go back to when there has been blood on the streets, we got the Civil War. We've got the kind of recent immigrants and the tough over Marxism in the 19-teens. Then you got the 1960s, and you had long hair hippie radicals, challenging what core America was about. And then you have the very recent years. So, it seems to me this is always there. It surfaces every once in a while. Our problem right now is that these are the issues that are really salient. And I think if we could get back and argue about economic issues, we'd be much better off. Argue about infrastructure. But no, we're arguing about immigration, about loyalty to America. When I did some surveys in 2020, the biggest split I had between liberals and Trump supporters were on 2 issues. That's English as a national language and standing up for the national anthem. The Colin Kaepernick kind of thing, which I thought was really interesting. But it kind of shows me that kind of, you've got to be loyal to America. That's the one side of the view. And the other one is, no, these people who are super loyal are the ones who are doing damage to people who are not quite like them. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, I think it's always there. It becomes more salient at certain times when we, a lot of times when we quit arguing about economics.
Okay, I'm going to ask you some of the questions that I asked the other professors, because we've gotten to the meat and potatoes, as I like to say, faster than I thought. I thought we'd kind of go through a journey, but we're hitting like the major issue right away.
That's probably my fault.
Professor, I'll ask you a question, and if you could answer both as a scholar and also as an American, somebody who's just lived here for a while. So I'm looking for both an academic answer and just I, John, feel this way from what I've seen. Obviously, you talked about the Civil War, super, mega bad, horrible. We talked about the 1960s, true, also a turbulent period, very violent. But I'm noticing What's the Matter with Kansas comes out in 2005. In 2005, if you had told me a president's going to encourage a group of people to storm the Capitol to perhaps deal with the way an election went, that they didn't prove. I would say that's crazy. That's madness. No president's going to do that. No party's going to allow that. Americans aren't going to storm the Capitol. That happens in a third world country. That's ridiculous. And then if you told me, well, after it happens and terrified everybody, they turned the Capitol into a military camp for basically a year, since in a way you hadn't seen since the Civil War. That's an objectionable fact. That's true. And then the Republican Party walks back their condemnation of storming the Capitol and then gets everyone in their party to be okay with it. I didn't expect January 6th. I did not expect Trump encouraging Stop the Steal. Never in my wildest dreams. And more so in never in my wildest dreams would I expect to see roughly half of the country go, yeah, you want to storm the Capitol? That's not treason. That's just, people blowing off steam, and walk it back. Insane behaviors. What is someone to think of the last 20 years? Hey, this is what we always go through. We kind of always have these problems. Or, I know we've had some hiccups historically over the last 2 centuries, but things seem to keep ramping up in a really bad, dangerous way beyond our expectations in an increasing manner over the last, 2005 to 2016, 2024. Which one is it? Is this normal rough and tough politics, or are we seeing a incremental increase in the instability of the American system based upon this polarization identity between the two sides?
Well, it's bad. I don't think anybody could, try to make this spin it like this was a good thing. But I do think it's important to remember that we have been through these kinds of things before. We mentioned the Civil War in the 1960s. So it's bad, but it's not brand new. I'm with you. I never anticipated what kinds of things we're seeing now. I think to me, it suggests that for a lot of people, the ends justifies the means. And they just feel that because of what they perceive to be increased immigration, threats to the core of America, just changing lifestyles, they find this so alarming that they need to take extra, to take these steps that you and me would go way beyond the pale. So, but I think for them, we need to start appreciating how vulnerable they feel. It might seem crazy to other people, but for them, this lack of security, the fact that, there might be a bad guy out there with a gun, that people who don't look like them are streaming into the country and worshiping different religions, that's extremely bothersome to some people. And I think we would probably be well served to recognize that's the case, not to forgive it, but just to say, okay, that's where they're coming from.
I'm picking up on the impression that this may not get better, that this divide is who we are. And if that's the case, it may continue. I've heard of something that terrified me that I call the Fiji theory. So Fiji was a island country. It's full of native Fijian people who are Pacific Island people. And then about half the country was Indian people who were imported by the British Empire. For a long time, it was fine. And then roughly in the 1990s, something happened where you had roughly 50% Fijians and 50% British Indians. But then it started shifting to 60-40. So for a century, they had even amounts. And then there was a roughly 10, 15-year period where I think it was the native Fijians realized they were no longer 50-50. They were dropping in size. And they were coming to a point where they were going to be 40% of the population, and the Indians were going to be 60% of the population. Between the time where they were 50-50 until that time where there was a clear new majority and minority, they had massive civil war and unrest because the group felt threatened by the other group and that their values and things were going to be taken away from them. When we look at it that way, the United States Census says that Caucasian people will not be, Caucasian people would be the majority voting base of America until the year 2044, or roughly when NASA has promised to have a colony on Mars. Are we looking at another 2-decade-long period of a Fijian type situation where threatened people who used to be part of the group in power continue to feel threatened until the point that they simply don't have enough political power to do anything about it? What does the next 20 years look like, Professor?
Well, I can't disagree with what you were building up to there. I wish I could. I would tell you that it's all going to be fine, but no, I think we have to brace ourselves for this. I think some of the demographic statistics you mentioned, there are a lot of people in the country who say, well, that's really neat. We got a very diverse society. And that's the kind of world I like to live in.
Sure. Me too. I'm mixed. I love it.
Sure, exactly. That's right. But then we also have to realize there are a lot of people in the world who find that really bothersome. And, the notion that there's not going to be that core any longer, what's been at the center of society, of American society for centuries. This is another kind of individual for whom that is incredibly bothersome.
I just remember the Iraq War. They went in and you had the minority Sunni group controlled the country through Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party. When America went in, we said all the Ba'ath Party members are basically out of work and you can't be employed. So we basically told an entire ethnic group, you can't have jobs, and this other ethnic group is going to be in charge. That resulted in civil war immediately for the next 10 years. So I'm wondering, where does this go? What happens, Professor? I know that, hey, we've had tough times before. What happens if there's another January 6th and another walk back of it, and then 2 years pass and there's another January 6th? Do we still live in a country where, things are bad, but we'll get over it? Or are people starting to think this ship can't hold together anymore?
Yeah, I worry about that a lot. I mean, democracy is very fragile. And once you lose it, it's really difficult to put those pieces back together. And, I don't think democracy is something that's very difficult to like, because it really means you're respecting the views of people who disagree with you.
Right.
At the core of democracy is a notion, I would say democracy is for losers, which sounds weird, but I mean that literally. It's when you lose, then democracy says, okay, you're not going to lose your life. You're not going to get thrown in jail. You're going to have a fair chance in 4 years to come back and become the majority party or whatever. And if we lose that, if losers no longer think that they have a legitimate chance of getting back in power, then we've lost everything. And so I think you're absolutely right. That's a fragile thing, and we need to do everything we can to protect it.
I had heard a similar phrase from another professor: democracy requires good losers. And I laughed and laughed, but they were like, think about it. If everybody's super hurt every time they lose an election, you don't have a country that's together. You got to have people who are gracious when they lose and don't take it too hard and say, well, we'll do better next time. And that's called being a good loser. Something you're supposed to learn as a little kid playing soccer. I know they made us shake the hand of the other teammate when I was a 5-year-old boy, so that you learn you don't get to hate the other team just because you lost to them. They made sure to teach us that as kids. Are we losing our ability to be good losers in America, Professor? And did we have it before?
Yeah, my students always laughed at me because I told them, like on election night, they'd always want to hear the speech by the person who won. And I said, no, I want to hear the speech by the guy who lost.
Right.
Individual. Because, I'm kind of a connoisseur of concession speeches because I think it's a really important aspect of democracy. And I can't tell you how sad I am that, not everyone has followed through on concession speeches, leaving a note, and for the person who's coming into the presidency after you. Those seem like little things, but I think they're really important. And they speak to being a good human being and a good democratic citizen.
Literally before you said the words, I go, those are little things that are so key to democracy. And you go, these are little things, but they're little traditions, but they're key to peaceful transition, right? One president writes the letter to the other president. Maybe I don't like you, but I'm going to give you a few tips, and I'll give you that phone call saying you won the election and I get it. And, then they also have the meeting with the new president and the old president. They're supposed to be somewhat cordial, but those traditions seem to be breaking down. Donald Trump didn't want to step down. He also didn't want to concede the election. Hillary Clinton also waited till the next morning to concede the election. And traditionally you concede it that evening. So that's nowhere near as bad as Trump, but that also is a little bit different. I was told that Joseph Biden was going to become president And there would be, quote, a national calming with his presidency. Professor, was there a national calming with the 4-year presidency of President Joseph Biden, in your professional opinion?
No, there was not. And
what?
Yeah. I think it probably goes back to the point you were making, that we need good losers, and we didn't always have that. So, if you can convince yourself that somehow the system was rigged, that it wasn't fair, you can do lots of crazy stuff. It's, in an athletic contest, it's really nice to say the ref was the problem, not
right.
my team. And, I think that's what we see in politics. It's nice to say, oh, it's just the system. It was somehow the election officials that did this. It wasn't that the candidate I liked was not supported by a sufficient number of people.
Right. Russia interfered in the election and made this other person president. It wasn't that only 42% of the country liked you, according to opinion polls, before you ever ran. And then we have to wait 2 years to find out Russia had no more than less than 1% effect on the 2016 election, but you wait 4 years to find that out. Does this get better if Joe Biden's elected? Hey, I'm going to cause a national calming. I was also told that when Donald Trump loses the election, Republicans will realize that they were wrong and they will turn away from him. That hasn't happened. So he's the nominee in 2016. He was in 2020, he lost. Now he's coming back, nominee 2024. That's like a 10-year period of liking Trump. Does this get better before 2040? Do people who feel threatened calm down? Do they realize there's not a big threat? Is there a candidate out there who can cause a national calming? Is a national calming possible at all, given the level of bitterness and vitriol we are at now? Today, before you answer, please answer as both a professor and an American who's living in the stew pot with the rest of us. Tell me, Professor, are we going to a boiling temperature, or is everything just the right temperature and we're going to be fine?
I'm going to go somewhere in the middle on that. I do think the confluence of personalities we have right now, with Donald Trump being at the center of that, has made things worse. I think when we no longer have those particular personalities, things could get somewhat better. However, I do think that Donald Trump didn't create this kind of attitude that we need to protect the core of America. That's always been there. He gave voice to that. And when he's gone, there's still going to be people who feel that way. And there are going to be lots of people, whether it be Josh Hawley or whoever you want to say, will come in and champion many of the things that Donald Trump has championed. I've never quite bought this notion that it was a cult of personality with Donald Trump.
Interesting. Please go on.
Well, I was very intrigued by, you might recall, I think it was a speech in Mississippi or Alabama quite some time ago when he was president. And he said something about, maybe getting vaccinated isn't all that bad an idea. And then he quickly backed off of that, but he was booed.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. So, and I do think they like what Trump stands for. And so if they come to the perception, which they may well come to if he loses in 2024, that he is an electoral liability, that he is not any longer the vehicle for promoting the kind of America first attitudes that they so love, then I think they'll turn to somebody else immediately. So in that sense, I just don't see it being a cult of personality around Donald Trump. I think it's these what I call securitarian attitudes where they want to protect themselves and the center of America.
Well, then his Trumpism going away. I've talked to some professors and they said, even if you got rid of Trump and you put him in prison, the fact is that Ron DeSantis is not Trump and he's linked into the culture wars more than Trump. Is this idea of a culture war and we're being attacked? And I want to appeal to those people. Let's say Trump goes to another planet tomorrow, but all of his followers are here. Does Trumpism die as we understand it, or do they simply pick another candidate who leans into this divide as you've been talking about it?
Yes, no, they definitely pick another candidate. So I think they've got a set of issues that they care about. If Trump is a proper vehicle for that, they're on board. If democracy is a vehicle for that, they're on board. But if it isn't, they'll turn on democracy in a second. If Trump isn't, If he doesn't seem to be producing the policies that they want or is successful electorally, they'll move on to somebody else very quickly. So no, if you want to call that Trumpism, I might.
Right, we can argue the terminal, but roughly that idea. Roughly,
nativism, whatever, you know what we're talking about. I think that's not going away at all.
That's more what I'm concerned, is just a general concept. Okay, let me ask you a scary question, if I may. I've asked a lot of professors, how bad is this? And they go, well, Mark, calm down. The Civil War, lots of people died. We're not there. Okay. But before the Civil War, there was this thing called Bleeding Kansas. And what interested me was that a lot of professors who went to the Civil War, I had to remind them about the Bleeding Kansas period. And they go, we didn't just jump into people shooting each other at the Battle of Bull Run. They had a 10-year period of people in the North and the South reading newspaper headlines of a Southerner walking up to another Northerner and shooting him in the face, and then nothing happening for a decade. And so they were desensitized to, there's Northerners shooting Southerners, and there's Southerners shooting Northerners, and just murder them in cold blood right in front of their family. Nobody's doing anything. And they read these headlines year after year after year after year for 10 years. Are we doing the same thing now? January 6th happens. Oh, that's okay. Oh, another January 6th. Oh, another January 6th. Where are we then? Do we have the Bleeding Kansas level of deprogramming? Is that possible? Or are we too evolved as humans now in America to ever degrade to that sort of thinking?
No, I think we need to be very concerned. Just because I or somebody else might say we've gone through this before with the Civil War of the 1960s doesn't mean we can be complacent about this. I think it means that, if we fight, if we value democracy, then we're going to be okay, but we can't relax. Okay. So that's where I come down. We've been through this before, and we might have been lucky to come through it. The Civil War could have gone another direction. And you're right. If we have a succession of January 6th, that's going to be big trouble. I don't think we can withstand that. I hope this isn't too much of a tangent, but I had a student who came and studied in my lab. He was from Brazil, and this was right when Bolsonaro came to power. And so I was saying, kind of jokingly, I said, so now you've got that too. And he said, you don't understand. In Brazil, we don't have the kinds of institutional histories that you do in the United States, the guardrails, if you will. And he said, we're really vulnerable. So I thought, well, you're right. I shouldn't have made any jokes about that. But now I think what's interesting is it's actually Brazil that's, putting some of Bolsonaro's supporters in jail, banning him from running again, taking judicial actions. And it's the United States, supposedly with all these institutional guardrails in history, that's having a devil of a time dealing with the kinds of disruptions that Donald Trump has visited upon the country.
Fair enough. I've seen that. I saw Rachel Maddow point to Brazil about that. Brazil, fair enough, over the last couple of years, yes. But historically looking over the last 2 decades to 40 years, Brazil's been there was literally a movie called Brazil with Robert De Niro in it, which was based upon a book called Brazil, which was about dysfunctional bureaucracy and the breakdown of civil society. Some professors have suggested that saying that we'll go to the Civil War is too extreme, but we might degrade to a Brazil quality government as it's historically been known and just stay there for the next 30 to 40 years. Possible or not possible, Professor?
I guess I don't see civil war. I just don't.
Yeah. They're saying we won't have a civil war, but our government will just continue to degrade to the level of functionality of Brazil in the 1980s.
I guess I'd be a little surprised about that as well.
Okay.
It depends how people react. If they really do, I'm still concerned with this notion that the ends justifies the means. So because democracy is a means, it's the way we make our policies. It's not the policies themselves. So I think whether you're on the left or right, we need to understand that we have to put up with some policies we don't like. Maybe on the left, you don't think the government's doing enough about the environment. So you say, I've heard some people on the left say, to save the planet, we need to get rid of democracy. And then, of course, on the right, you've got to preserve security of the core. We need to get rid of democracy. I have to believe they're both wrong. I have just taught democracy for too long. And I think if you don't have democracy, you don't have anything. When you do have democracy, that means you're going to not win all the time. And you're going to have to put up with some policies that you don't like.
It's incredible how, as adults, we struggle to learn the things in this country that I was forced to learn as a little boy. I remember them forcing us to shake the hands of the other little boys on the opposing team, and I didn't want to.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why my parents were insistent I go do this. I thought, this is silly, screw, you know. But I get it as an adult. I didn't know it as a child, but you're forced to do it. Eventually, as an adult, you learn you can't just hate the other person because you lost a game. I mean, there'd be no sports. There'd be no professional football or soccer if everybody's like, oh, we lost, let's go kill them all. There'd be no sports team. You wouldn't have sports. You wouldn't have great sports legends because they'd die off the first game. Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you, because we're talking about a difference between conservatives and liberals that goes back to early child formation or perhaps development of the brain. One is more concerned about security. The other is more open to new experiences. Have you heard of the concept of the big sort?
I have. I'm a big fan.
It's real. You're saying it's real?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, I think Bishop is absolutely right. People will ask me when they hear my stuff, well, why do we see these big differences from one part of the country to the other? Are there biological differences? That doesn't make sense to them. But I think if you realize that people are making these conscious decisions to live in certain places and that they'd like to live around people who are like them, then it makes a lot of sense. A personal anecdote, I come from a family of 4. So I have 3 siblings, and 2 kind of lean to the left, 2 to the right. 2 to the right stayed in their hometown. And we were raised in a very small town. They stayed there. They were comfortable there. The other 2, got out of Dodge as soon as possible, went to larger cities. I think that's the kind of thing we have to recognize, that there is a certain amount of self-selection in the kind of environment we're going to live in. And that's one of the reasons that we have a lot of red states and blue states these days.
You were talking about how we got to be able to work together, left and right, red and blue, and we got to be able to talk with each other. The big sort is showing that we're moving to separate communities, increasingly so from the 1990s. NPR radio has looked at this in like 2020, along with Forbes magazine, and they said the trend continues up to 2022. So now we're looking at a 30-year period of increasing segregation and isolation between the left and blue communities. How does this play out over the next 20 years, Professor? Does it look good, or does it look like the kind of environment that leads to more January 6ths, in your opinion?
Well, I'm probably going to dodge that a little bit. To me, it looks like...
Fair enough. Sorry. Fair enough. That was a loaded question.
Yeah.
I do that occasionally. Sorry.
I think what we need to do is understand what the other side is thinking. Even if that doesn't mean, when I say that, sometimes people think, oh, whether you're forgiving them or you're both sizing it. No, you can still think they're crazy, but I think it would be useful to understand what their motivations are. And so and then you can do whatever you want with that kind of information. But maybe it's because I've been in education too long, and I just think that understanding is a good first step. Understanding doesn't mean you agree. Because if you go back to my original comments, we're just very different. So just understand that we're different, and then let's see what we can do to put this society together, even in the face of that.
Okay. We need to understand that we're different. Let me ask you a question I've asked some of the other professors. Let's say I live in San Francisco, California, super liberal city. And I walk down and I'm a liberal, hardcore liberal. And I walk down the street and I meet someone who says they're a Republican, but they live in San Francisco. Why are they Republican? They want low taxes and low regulations. And they're LGBTQ, and they love it, and they love climate change, and they believe in all these other liberal things, but they're for low taxes, low regulations. So they consider themselves a hardcore Republican in San Francisco. And so I say to myself, as a liberal who lives in San Francisco, well, I just saw this map on the big sort. I want us to start to understand each other. So I live in San Francisco, and I went down the street to a coffee shop and I talked to a Republican who's lived in San Francisco his whole life, and we came to an understanding. Therefore, I've merged the difference between liberals on the West Coast and conservatives. Or is it more appropriate to say the people we need to get in touch with is the San Francisco liberal with the Kansas City conservative? Because now we're talking about two people who have wildly different views, and we need them to understand each other. Whereas the Republican in San Francisco, who's only Republican because of low taxes, isn't really the level of opposition we should be having the discussion at. Is it okay to go down the street and talk to somebody? Or do we really need to have these blue and red communities in these maps actually start talking to each other? Because those are separate counties, and that requires distance, travel. We had 50 professors that I talked to, and they all said, I am getting people together, left and right, together to talk, to deal with this. And I said, great. How are you doing it? They go, within my city. Okay. Is your city all conservative or liberal? Well, yeah. Okay. Are you reaching out in your city to the other landslide election district? No. 2 professors out of 50 were doing that. What sort of interaction do we need to have?
None.
None.
None. Yeah, I would say, I know there are these organizations that it's like go out to dinner with somebody on the other side of the political spectrum from you. And I've never seen any evidence that they really have much success in doing that. Maybe for a little while, but it doesn't take long, and then they're back there. So when I say understand, I don't mean necessarily hang out with each other, have beers with each other, go out to dinner. I'm just not sure where that's going to get you, because at the end of the day, you've got very different values, and I think it's going to be frustrating. So, but I think acknowledging that those people exist, you can have however much interaction with them that you want, but I don't see it doing us a whole lot of good. But we do need to acknowledge that they exist, even if you don't have any interaction with them.
So understanding that they're, yeah, I'm sorry.
I just said that's not the answer you were expecting, was it?
No, because everybody, hold on. This is why I do the series, though, to understand. Thank you. A lot of people have said and seem to be of the opinion, especially people who are in the newspapers, that we just need to get together and talk to each other more, and that's how we fix America. And you're saying that's not really going to work. I've heard that from a few other people, but the majority opinion does seem, yeah.
Yeah, that's a pipe dream. So that goes back to the idea that somehow if they just listen to me a little bit and I listen to them, maybe somehow we'll compromise, or I'll persuade them, or they'll persuade me. No, we're different. We're different species. And I think we're just setting ourselves up for some frustration and a fall if we try to do that.
That's why I do the series for you, the audience. I study this a lot, but even I get corrected, and that's why we do this, and that's why I do live shows so that you can learn too. Fascinating take. Okay, we're winding down. I have to ask you this question. This is something I've been fascinated with. Okay, how do I frame this? Because it doesn't always go over perfectly. Donald Trump has said, I want to punch that guy in the face. He's also had rallies where he's told his rallies, got people, if you punch these people, I'll bail you out. He's used violent language. Not good, bad. At the same time, though, we have the Democratic Party who's saying Trump's an existential threat. I watched the DNC. It was Trump's an existential threat. If he's elected, you may not have America tomorrow. If he's elected, you may not have another election. If he's elected, they will round up the gays. They literally said that on MSNBC. They literally said that. Donald Trump is Hitler. Donald Trump's the end of democracy. If Donald Trump wins, democracy's on the line. We won't have a democracy if Donald Trump's here. Does existential threat language have the possibility to compel people to violence as potently as somebody who's just using plain violent language? For example, so is Donald Trump the only one we can blame for presidential shootings? Or is saying by half the country, this guy's Hitler, and if he gets in, everything you know will be over. There won't be an America tomorrow. There won't be another election. People will be rounded up. Journalists will be put into prison. Politicians that you know will be shot. This is what they're saying on television. Can that also compel people to feel threatened and lash out?
Sure. I mean, words matter, and we need to be careful. And a lot of people have not been particularly careful. The only qualification I would make with the example you're using is some of Donald Trump's own words, I think, have created this vision of an existential threat. You know, he's the one who said he was going to be a dictator on day one. He's the one who said we don't have to have elections anymore after this one. So I guess if I were advising the Democrats, I'd say tone down your language, but do point out that, you know, Melania or whomever was saying it's all the Democrats' fault. You know, I think he has to be careful with his words as well.
He did, in my opinion, and I have friends who don't agree, I felt he did call for stop the steal, and I felt he did call for people to come to January 6th, and it's very clear now. So they're going, well, he issued a tweet saying to be peaceful later on, and I'm like, okay, but that was later on in the day, and he was saying one thing and got these people riled up, and we know, going back to a very famous Supreme Court case, if you yell fire in a crowded theater, that is not protected free speech. Supreme Court ruled that for a while. So here's going, get them, get them. They're going to come and get us. Let's get in there. I can see how you're responsible for that. But I also remember being a boy, and my grandpa was in World War II. I was told that that was an honorable thing, and he was a great man for standing up against the Imperial Japanese and the Nazis. And I watched a bunch of movies as a boy about how the Nazis are bad. And I remember being told as a little boy, if you had a time machine and you can go back and kill Hitler, you would be a hero to do that. We were taught that as children. So now I'm being told Donald Trump's Hitler. Donald Trump's a Nazi. Donald Trump will be the end of America. Is that a way to fall back on my programming that killing Hitler's okay?
Again, I would just say focus less on the words of the Democrats and focus on the words of Donald Trump. And you know, I guess I don't like his strategy where he'll say something outrageous like that we don't need to have elections in the future, and then say he was just joking. I mean, I don't know when we take him seriously and when we don't, or that he's going to be a dictator on day one. And he says, well, no, I didn't. You can't take that literally. So I think in our leaders, we are okay in demanding a little bit more precision with language. Having said that, I wouldn't disagree with you that on the left, people need to be a little bit more careful at stoking up the flames as well.
It's difficult because he has done outrageous things.
I know.
Outrageous. But I watched the DNC convention, and I've been in politics for 20 years. Typically, a convention pokes fun at the other party. These Republicans want this, and they want this, and there's their platform. This was almost every single speaker was talking about Trump, almost to the detriment of not even mentioning the Republicans. That's the first time I've seen a political convention where they weren't really talking about the other party. They were talking about a specific guy, every single person in a row, about 30 of them. And it was always, you know, it's going to be over with this guy. And I'm like, I don't recall seeing that in a Democratic convention where they so focused on an individual person as a threat to everything we've ever seen before, rather than attacking the party at large. I found that to be new. And is that a disturbing trend? Or is this okay that every Republican convention, every Democratic national convention in the future goes forward with a campaign strategy of the guy we're going against is really the problem, and he's an existential threat to everything you want. And so it's okay to demonize him as much as possible. And that just becomes standard with how we do conventions in the future. Is that a good thing if it went that way?
I guess I make a distinction between demonizing someone with regard to their policy proposals, which I don't think is okay. But demonizing with regard to protecting democracy, that to me is a different thing. And okay. I would have a different definition of what we need to worry about there. Because as I said before, and you said as well, that I think once we endanger democracy, then it's much more challenging to go back. So yeah, I think we need to be careful. If you want to reduce immigration, and I think we should keep it just where it is, that's something we can talk about. And we shouldn't demonize simply on the basis of that. But if we're talking about somebody who we really are convinced and who has said themselves that they're a threat to democracy, then I think we're justified in taking that up a notch.
Fair enough. But we also talked about how existential threat language can compel people who maybe emotionally aren't in the best place to go and do things.
So
And
Marcus, what's the extension of that? If we think someone is an existential threat to democracy, we shouldn't say anything about it?
that's the question I'm asking, because what I'm seeing right now is the media saying Donald Trump is to blame for all violence going on in the political theater. Democrats are not to blame at all because we didn't use violent language. We just used existential threat language. So that's totally different. And what caught me off guard is I've seen 16 different people saying on TV, not one of them has a psychological background or has done any of the kind of research in the human mind that you've done. And yet all of them are coming up and saying, nope, this is the way the human mind works. Existential threat language does not compel a person to violence. Only violent language can do that. And I go, where's your PhD in psychology or sociology or clinical psychology or studying human minds? None of them have that. And I'm going, are we telling the American people the truth based upon science? Or are people saying what they think they know when they don't have the educational background to be making those kind of statements?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I'm one of the stronger believers that some of our political attitudes come from genetics and from biology, but that doesn't mean context is unimportant. It certainly is. And so I wouldn't disagree with you on that at all.
Professor, winding down, you've been awesome. I really appreciate you answering questions and letting me ask tough questions. For everybody, Predisposed Liberals, Conservatives, and the Biology of Political Difference was the book where I found the professor. And it's a great book. And then he's also saying, well, yeah, but you should check this one out because it's really zeroed in on Trump. And I have to say, after our discussion and looking at the description of this, highly, highly appropriate. Okay, last question as we're winding down. Let's say you're not you. Sorry, I'm going to sneeze. Sorry. Sorry.
Salute.
You're not you. You're not me. You're an average American from Iowa or Boston or San Antonio or Seattle, and they're watching this video and they go, wow, I learned a lot, especially when he said the whole working with the other side may not bring sudden understanding. But there was a lot discussed. Some of it was positive. Some of it seemed a little negative. I'm struggling to remember it all, but there was this one thing that the professor said when he was talking about the future of political polarization in America, and I cannot get that thought out of my head. It's 5 days after I watched the video. I'm going to watch it again. There was a lot of concept, but there was this one idea that just rings out in my head after watching the video when I'm thinking about political polarization and the future of America. Professor, what is that sticky thought that a person you'll never meet can't get out of their head after hearing you say it now?
It is that people are genetically, physiologically, biologically different, and some of these differences manifest themselves in political attitudes. These differences are very deep, and in order for us to get along as a society, we need to appreciate those differences and work together to try to have a functioning democracy in spite of that. You know, there's never been a successful multi-ethnic democracy, really. And I would say the same thing is true. There's always been a dominant ethnic group. And so what we're trying to do is very hard. And it's especially hard when we recognize these political differences that exist. So we can't mollycoddle this. It's a tough strategy or a tough task we've given ourselves. But I think recognizing the difficulty is better than somehow just saying, oh, well, deep down, we're all the same. It's going to be fine.
Difficulties ahead. The ship can be saved. Don't underestimate the dangers in the waters that you may face in the future.
That's
fair.
You did a good job. I see why you're the host of these things.
Well, I did want to ask, would you be okay if I reached out to some of your co-authors on this paper and showed them the interview that we did?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, we'll leave it there. Professor, I'm going to send you an email with a copy of the video here shortly. I want to say thank you. If you know anybody else who'd like to be interviewed, we're always looking for other people, and I will reach out to your colleagues. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughts. Thanks for working with me and doing a little bit of the back and forth with the questions. I find these conversations are not happening enough, And a lot, like right now, a lot of people are saying we just have to get out there and go meet each other. And then for you to come in and go, well, hold on now. That's the kind of dialogue is not getting to the national level of a nation that I feel is approaching another January 6th in the next 2 to 3 years. So this is the kind of conversations I think we need to be having, and we need to have at the national level so that we can prevent things from getting worse by discussing what's our actual way out. Because I've heard so many people say, just get rid of social media. And poof, America will go back to normal and everybody will calm down and everything will be fine. I'm seeing that all over the place. And I'm like, I've interviewed at least 15 professors who said, that's not true. Yeah. That's a pipe dream. You let the genie out the bottle. Just because you remove the bottle, it doesn't forget it's now a genie. We're here now.
That's right.
So there's some simplistic solutions I see, and I like this series because we can get better answers. Thank you for coming out. I'll email you shortly. Thank you, Professor. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the thoughtful questions. I appreciate that. That's always fun.
Absolutely. I'll email you shortly, and thank you, sir.